So far, we've heard today really many great ideas about helping workers connect and engage the workforce. And as the governor said, and put more money in their pockets. That's a huge increase from what they just earned that they told us about. The next panel that I would like to introduce has some innovative examples of workforce investments taking place across the nation, but also here in North Carolina. I'm sure these investments will inspire further conversations among some of the decision makers here in the room today. So please help me welcome to the stage this afternoon Managing Director of Impact Investments of Social Finance, Michael Grossman. Here they come. Managing Director of Portfolio Strategy and Management with Blue Meridian, Othello Meadows. Director of Economic Security with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, Emily Apple, and the CEO of the Cape Fear Collection, Meaghan Dennison. Welcome to our panelists.
Thank you very much. I'm Michael Grossman. I'm Managing Director of Impact Investments at Social Finance, impact investing and advisory business nonprofit based in Boston with offices spread out across the United States. Listening to the session this morning, the one right before lunch when we talked about cross-cutting themes, so many resonated with me, and I hear three questions that stand out. I'm a banker, and so I see talent first economics, and of course I read talent first finance. So I'm going to talk a little bit about financial services. But hearing the cross-cutting themes, the three that stood out to me most importantly were, putting people first. Sounds obvious, but in reality, when we're talking about systems, we're talking about people and developing models that will create meaningful career pathways for people and create jobs that will allow people to pursue pathways to prosperity. It's really important to always keep in mind. And then finally, identifying new funding models that will allow people to focus on pathways is something that we spend a lot of time thinking about at Social Finance. And a lot of our work recently has focused on providing outcomes-based, student-friendly financing to allow learners, adult learners, to pursue the kind of training that will lead for them to get significant and sustained income increases. We have a number of place-based workforce finance funds that are generally characterized by no upfront cost to students, significant support services, whether it's coaching, stipends, or career placement services, and outcomes-based repayment so that learners don't have to pay unless they hold jobs that have a salary above a minimum income threshold, which will vary by place to place, but which is generally set at the level of a family-sustaining wage. We're excited about the Pay It Forward fund model that we're working on because we believe that it impacts and can multiply the availability, amplify, sustain. There's lots of words we can use. Stretch out the availability of either philanthropic, corporate, or government dollars to provide workforce training. We believe the Pay It Forward function, whereby learners who have received jobs above a minimum income threshold pay back the cost of their training to the fund so that it can be recycled. We believe this structure provides accountability because you can measure the success of training programs when people get jobs and pay back their services. We think it's really an important way to align the economic development objectives of local governments and local corporates. We believe that having corporates involved in the training and determination of what's required upfront is extremely important. And finally, to where I started with the putting people first, we really seek to minimize the debt burden debt burden borne by learners by both having a variable repayment structure so that people pay back based on their results, based on the jobs they receive, and that we launch people onto career pathways. We're really excited about this work. We've implemented we haven't implemented. Our partners in the state of New Jersey have implemented the very first Pay It Forward program in the United States, have quickly been followed by teams in Miami and about to be followed by another team in Colorado. We've had wonderful support from our friends at Blue Meridian Partners, who is one of the leading philanthropists focused on economic mobility and workforce development. So I'm going to start there with you, Othello. So tell me, what is it about this place-based approach that is attractive to Blue Meridian?
So, for us, and first of all, it's great to be here. I spent a lot of time in North Carolina. I'm a ECU graduate and a North Carolina Central graduate, so if we have Pirates or Eagles in the house, okay, all right. I feel much more at home already. So for us, we think about models like this as a way to utilize our capital to catalyze change behavior. Specifically, when we think about sustainability and we think about stretching out funds, we know that the types of problems that everybody in this room tries to tackle and that we try to tackle at Blue Meridian, scale is impossible without the public sector. And so we think about our dollars, our private capital, as a means of sparking and catalyzing change behavior at the governmental level, as well as bringing additional philanthropic dollars that may be on the sideline, right, that are sitting there and investing in other things or not being invested at all, bringing those dollars to the party as well. So we are, like any other funder, right? We're needy and we're clingy, right? We're like, your junior high girlfriend or boyfriend. We don't want to be at the party by ourselves. And so, for us, it's really important to say, will our dollars, if we invest at a specific level, at a high enough level, will that catalyze change behavior, right? Will that lead to more public resources for programs like we're talking about? Will that lead to more innovation in programs like we're talking about? And so we see ourselves as really trying to spark that sort of change in behavior, predominantly from philanthropy and from government.
We, at Social Finance, as I said, we've gotten tremendous and ongoing support from Blue Meridian. And it really, I note that it really does catalyze different actors coming to the table. The State of New Jersey Pay It Forward Fund, which Emily will talk about in a little bit, brought in the State of New Jersey and a group of the largest corporates in New Jersey that each came together to develop a fund that will meet the needs of New Jersey students. None of that would have been possible without the support of Blue Meridian. Similarly, we're about to sign an agreement to put in place a Pay It Forward fund in the state of Colorado, and there's 4 small philanthropies, each with a couple $1 million, and they were all working on very similar programs where we are able to aggregate them into one structure with the support of Blue Meridian, and the association with Blue Meridian actually brings everybody to the table. And so I think Othello's, I think the attractiveness, their ability to catalyze capital is really important and does bring a lot of different actors to the table. And I think what we're learning today is that you need a wide range of actors to make the programs work. Is there any advice you would give to your fellow North Carolinians on if they were interested in putting in place a job training program and a job financing program? What would they be considering?
As a funder, I'd look at this and I'd say, if you aren't pushing philanthropy to fund programs or fund these gaps in programs in a way that makes them uncomfortable, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. I think what has happened historically, and I was on the other side of the table like 3 years ago, as people who lead organizations, we ask for what we think we can get, not necessarily what we think we need, right? And so if you can really lay out how your work combined with public resources, combined with private capital, can change things in a way that folks haven't seen before or in a more quantifiable way. I think there's an appetite within philanthropy right now to go bigger and to go deeper. Kind of one of our core principles at BNP is to say, look, we need to be in a place, we need to be in a partnership for multiple years and at a really deep funding level. And I think that it is hard when you're on the other side of the table to to ask for what you truly need, right? But there are more and more funders who are coming around to the point of view that I can't give you a 2-year grant and then just say, okay, what happened? And how come these things aren't changing at the pace that we'd like to see them happen at? And so our funding behavior has changed. And I think you'll find a much more receptive audience in the philanthropic community to that now. The big thing I would say that is driving all those decisions, though, to your point about what folks here can do, data, and being able to tell your story with data in a really clear and coherent way, whether that's good or bad, right? Like, what are you learning? What are you pulling out of the programs that you're running? That is enormously persuasive to funders. And I know it's a scary thing sometimes to talk about the things that aren't going great, right? But within those are lessons that'll help it go better in the future. And so funders right now are very tuned into the idea of, like, how are you using data to guide your decisions? And number two, like, how are you weaving or creating a data narrative that a broader audience besides the people in your organizations that care about numbers can actually grasp and wrap their arms around? That's the single biggest thing in philanthropy right now, that folks are saying, how do I know what's going on, good or bad? And then how do I tell this story about the work that you do?
I think it's a really interesting point, because data is such an important, sound like such a platitude, but that, having the ability to make meaningful and informed decisions drives accountability in so many of the programs. It's, when we launched the concept of looking for training providers for whom we could finance, that would lead to significant and sustained income increases for learners. We went and saw lots of training providers and said, okay, so you've been doing this for a long time. How do your students do? They do great. Do they get jobs? Everyone gets jobs. Okay, can we actually see the information about that? And then it's more anecdotal. It's, let me introduce you to Michael. He graduated after a tough life, and look at him now. And it feels very anecdotal. And it's the ability to make, if we're providing outcomes-based financing, this is what we expect to happen, having access to data to help us make those decisions and understand where the biggest bang for your philanthropy or for your government, for your public sector dollars is extremely important. Emily, when you were looking at the opportunity to develop a Pay It Forward fund in New Jersey to help fill the gap for jobs that was existing amongst numerous employers, how did data fit into into your decision making?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting the state of New Jersey down here. I bring greetings from the Garden State. It's been really wonderful to hear about what North Carolina is doing and hearing so many of the challenges. We have them in New Jersey too. We have the gap in the workforce that we know the talent is there, but the skills that they need, the skills that employers are looking for are out of reach, not because people don't have the ability or the stick-to-itiveness to want to get them, but because it's unaffordable. We also know in New Jersey that there's a huge gap, to your point about data, in attainment rates for Black and Latino students. We have a very high overall attainment rate in the state of New Jersey, but particularly our Black and Latino students are lagging behind in that rate. And it's not because they're less smart, less talented, it's because the opportunity and accessibility isn't there, and we need to think about what are the equity-driven solutions to raise that attainment rate. So one of the ways that we're pursuing this is through the Pay It Forward Fund, the idea of which is to be a last dollar solution to help students access training. So we're really lucky in the state of New Jersey that Governor Murphy has really pushed forward an agenda around stronger and fair. I heard your governor talking about putting more money in people's pockets. We have a similar agenda in New Jersey around creating not just a stronger economy, but a fairer one, and making sure we're not leaving people behind. So to that end, Governor Murphy has instituted programs like the Community College Opportunity Grant, which provides a free associate's level education for families making up to $60,000 a year. and then the Garden State Guarantee, which will pay for the 3rd and 4th year of a college education to get a baccalaureate degree. But even with those programs and the wealth of other resources that exist in New Jersey, there are gaps. So what we wanted to do with the Pay It Forward program was look at where those gaps existed and how we could use this as an opportunity to fill that in a way that was going to pioneer the most student-centric, most borrower-friendly way possible. So that required a lot of different policy choices on our part. We thought about things like zero interest, zero fee student loans. That's not being done that many places, but that was a really, really important policy decision for us. We thought about things like providing living stipends to be able to support students while they are engaged in training. We thought about things like where do we know that our economy is going? Where are the jobs going to be that are going to provide the wages such that people can actually afford to repay these loans and we're not contributing to the student debt crisis. So these were all considerations among many, many others that I can go into that we had to grapple with as we thought about how do we create a Pay It Forward fund that really lives out the values of a stronger and fairer New Jersey economy.
So you mentioned some of the policy trade-offs. And, like so many things, the Pay It Forward Fund is a tool that you're using to achieve increased economic mobility in New Jersey. And we're going to define increased economic mobility as higher incomes. And so you had to make some decisions. What were some of the other harder decisions that you had to make, like things you may have had to leave on the table?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I think one of the ideas when this first came to us was that this was going to be an evergreen fund, that we were going to put this money in, that government and private entities were going to be able to put money into the fund and it was going to sustain itself forever because students would repay their loans and it would go back into the fund and it would go to pay for the next student and on and on and on and on.
Hence Pay It Forward Fund.
Mm-hmm.
We may have come up
Pay
with
It
the name
Forward.
before we thought about the concept.
And we made some choices that made that impossible. And that was a choice and a trade-off that we were willing to make as a state because ultimately the value that we decided to put at the center of our target was student centricity and borrower centricity. And that required trade-offs. It meant that we weren't going to have an evergreen fund if we didn't put in any additional dollars as a state, and our state has put in $7.5 million so far that has been matched by philanthropic partners and corporate partners with an additional $5 million. So we have $12.5 million in the fund right now. We're hoping that we can continue to get additional state investment, but with that $12.5 million, that's not going to last indefinitely. It will turn over, it'll last, but it's not going to be this self-sustaining fund forever and into eternity. But we were willing to make that trade-off because we wanted to create the most student-friendly loan product on the market, something that was going to actually benefit the lives of students who took advantage of this. So that's how we decided on things like we were going to do a zero interest, zero fee loan. We were going to tie repayment to best-in-class practices done by the U.S. Department of Education around their student loans for income-based repayment, where we discount up to 200% of the federal poverty line based on family size, and then only size your loan repayment based on the income that's left over on top of that. So you already have to make a pretty high wage threshold in order to begin repayment. After 5 years, anything that you had in your balance because at some point you never met that income threshold to begin repayment, we would forgive it entirely. That we were going to put aside some of that $12.5 million that exists in the fund for things like non-repayable living stipends, that we're going to support you while you're in training and you don't have to give anything back. Establishing an emergency aid fund where if your car breaks down, if you're about to be evicted from your apartment, if you face a medical emergency, if you can't afford to pay for your groceries for yourself and your family, you can access up to $1,000 and you can do so multiple times. all of that has trade-offs against the life of the fund and the number of times it can be turned around and the number of students that can actually be served ultimately by this. But those were trade-offs we were willing to make in order to make this the most student-friendly loan product that we could.
Thank you very much. Meaghan, you've heard about some of and I've not just heard about today, I know, but you heard about a lot of the innovation that some other states have been pursuing, particularly New Jersey, in developing pay-it-forward funds. I know you and your team at the Cape Fear Collective have piloted a talent finance facility down in Wilmington. Mm-hmm. What have you learned from this experience? And as you think about going forward, what are you bringing with you based on what you've learned and what you've heard today?
Sure. So it's great to be here. Othello, you started the trend, so any Appalachian grads. I'm a Raleigh native, excited to be back in Raleigh, but go Nears. And a privilege to go last, and that you, my co-panelists, teed this up so well. But just quickly about Cape Fear Collective, we're a nonprofit based in Wilmington, but seeking to serve kind of the broader North Carolina region. And we really believe at our heart that data plus capital equals impact. And that translates to our team on the ground. Not only impact, but we think more inclusive impact and more equitable impact. So we have a team of 6 data scientists that are working to do kind of what Othello mentioned, is help embed with organizations on the front lines and also funders to understand how to target interventions, prove impact, and really provide world-class data science expertise to the nonprofit community, which the for-profit and private sectors have been doing for a long time. We think it should be no different in the social impact sector. Quickly, the other side of our house is impact investing. So we actually thought we would get started on workforce development investments, which I'll speak to our pilot here quickly. We actually launched affordable housing impact investing first. So we have about 17 million deployed into affordable housing in the Cape Fear region, and hoping to kind of scale that across Eastern North Carolina by working with local partners on the ground in the affordable housing space. In the midst of launching this kind of impact investing platform, we embarked on an inclusive economy report for our region, really to understand what does upward economic mobility look like in 2021 at the time in the Cape Fear region, knowing that COVID certainly exacerbated a lot of the issues, much like it did for other communities. And in that report included a feasibility study and really a grant-funded pilot around career impact bonds, or how could we invest in and support students in shorter-term, high-impact training programs and go beyond just tuition and fees. In one scenario, it was transportation and moving expenses once that person graduated, received their certificate, and got employment, unfortunately out of state, but still a high-paying job. Another was a single mother. Her tuition and fees were covered by Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, which was wonderful, but there were still barriers. And for her, it was 12 months of her mortgage while she became an LPN to RN in a 9-month accelerator program. And so this was small scale, certainly compared to what's happening at Blue Meridian nationwide and in New Jersey, but we really just wanted to prove that it could be done, and that if you really took a case-by-case, student-centered, paired with organizations on the ground, and I will say Cape Fear Collective was just the financing mechanism. Is Randolph Keaton still in the room? Yeah, he's probably rolling his eyes. I spoke to him about this a couple years ago in the sense of like, if we launched this, would you have the pipeline of students and would you be able to walk hand in hand with them through the program, the case management with Life Happens? And of course his answer was yes, because that is the work that organizations are doing across the state. We simply need an additional tool that is student-centered to help fill the gap, because we're program rich in my opinion, but some of those kind of more specific gap filling, particularly around like this type of financing mechanism, is really a miss. And that's what we're trying to test, and thankfully everyone graduated, everyone got a high-paying job, and in theory could have repaid their investment anywhere from $2,000 to $12,000.
Well, that's great. So everyone got a high-paying job.
They did.
Which is amazing. What we've learned is what we're learning is that it's really important to bring employers into the conversation to again, lower the risk that the learners bear. And we're asking them to take risk on time because there's no upfront cost, but nevertheless, we do want to make sure that people benefit from the training they're getting. We've found that having employers at the table early is a key way to make sure that training programs work. Each of you, how do you do that? Like, what would your experience be to get employers engaged?
I'll give a shout out to Talent Pipeline Management. I know the NC Chamber Foundation is in the room. That has kind of been the driving force of a lot of the work that we're now exploring in the Wilmington region. We have really eager employers at the table, particularly in the tech sector. We have a growing financial tech industry with a cluster of employers, in the Cape Fear region. And they're really at the driver's seat. And when your talent needs are so great, the time to think innovatively and quickly and to pilot and fail fast, which we also think you should be able to recognize when something's not working and pivot, which is, again, the need for kind of the pilot that we embarked on. So we actually have a tech talent collaborative happening. Talent Pipeline Management is essentially, if you're unfamiliar, looking at the supply chain methods for your talent. And it starts with getting employers in the room. We have about a dozen tech employers right now that are agreeing to leave swords at the door, leave the competitive nature at the door, and do collective demand planning, and then really understand our capacity gap. In Wilmington, not unlike other communities, we are importing talent like crazy, which is wonderful. But back to that inclusive economy report, it's really a tale of two economies, and we're leaving behind a large portion of Wilmington's middle and lower class that with just small upskilling and opportunities could get a foot in the door at a local employer and then build their career locally in Wilmington without the cost of employers to import that talent. So I would say, I've heard from another employer, just a quick example, like, how do you cut out the noise? Because there are so many solutions happening. And so it would just encourage kind of, if you're looking to do this in your communities, like, provide that space to bring other employers to the table. There's great help and facilitators out there so that we can kind of pause on solutioning to actually do the data collection from employers to then fill the gaps with various programs.
And we were lucky in New Jersey to have really engaged corporate partners from the outset of this. This idea came to us from the governor's CEO council, which was 9 of the largest corporations in New Jersey that came together with the governor during COVID-19 to address the economic fallout and the economic recovery. And they really came to us with this idea of, we want to train and hire 70,000 underrepresented New Jerseyans by 2030. Let's come up with a solution to help meet that target. And this was one of the ideas that came out of that brainstorming and collaboration with these CEOs. And they really have been partners with us in this process, and they held our feet to the fire to make sure that we were really addressing their needs. I'll say RWJ Barnabas, which is one of the largest hospital systems in New Jersey in particular, was insistent that there be a nursing program included in this program. And we initially were not so sure that Pay It Forward was going to be the right fit to address that issue, because between Community College Opportunity Grant and Garden State Guarantee, there were other financing mechanisms where students could actually get a free nursing education, so we thought. We then dug in a little bit more, sort of at RWJB's insistence, and found that while the Community College Opportunity Grant covered the tuition for students that wanted an associate's level nursing education, the fees actually were not fully covered. They were many thousands of dollars more and stood in the way of people actually enrolling and successfully completing nursing programs. So we actually found that Pay It Forward was going to be the perfect avenue to address this need. And I can share that we did the launch event back in August with the governor at Hudson County Community College, our nursing partner in this effort. And the head of workforce for RWJB was at the event and handing her business card out to any student she met, saying, I will hire you. Because we know in New Jersey, in North Carolina, across the entire country, there is such a nursing shortage. So we were really fortunate to have those corporate partners at the table ready to hire students from the jump. The other piece of the equation that we thought about when we were looking at what would be the training provider partners was really about what are the institutions that are on the ground, that know their communities, that know their local employers, and are already plugged into those networks. So we actually are working exclusively with community colleges and public universities because they both know the population of students in the area and are plugged into a network of employers and understanding how to create those linkages and make a pipeline to make sure that students are hired. So we've sort of addressed it both from sort of the top level of thinking about what are our largest corporations and how do we get them to be partners, or really they came to us to be partners, and then also thinking about what are the local employers' needs that maybe aren't the Prudentials of the world, but are the Main Street businesses that still have these talent needs, and making sure that we are equally plugged into those networks through our training partners.
Yeah. Just real quickly, I would say that, authentic partnerships are really critical. I think when in the time frame that we're in now, you have a lot of people that come to the table because they think it's what they're supposed to do and where they're supposed to be. But goodwill is not nearly the motivator that like financial distress is. So if you are a corporation and you can't fill IT positions that cost you money, right? If you can't fill, production positions that cost you money, like it's a much stronger motivator than doing the right thing, unfortunately. I mean, and I think that's just the reality of the situation. So finding employers that have an actual need, right, rather than, the good corporate citizenship piece is important. But what happens in a former life, I ran a workforce development corporation in Omaha, and what we found was when there wasn't a real economic need, right, that goodwill and that good corporate citizenship waned very quickly. The other thing that we also learned was that it was really important to create relationships, not just at the top of these organizations or these corporations, because those people change, but 2, 3, 4 levels down within that organization so that the spirit of what you're trying to do is more embedded in that corporation than if it's just one CEO's passion project. Because ultimately it's going to come down, from my experience, to can you solve an economic problem for me? And that's the relationship I think you actually want to be in. I think other people end up wasting a lot of your time. One example of a place that we invest in an organization in Dallas that has also taken a different tack on this, which is to help organizations and especially public agencies see the mutuality of economic mobility for everybody in that region. So this organization in Dallas, it's called Commit, and CPAL, their partners, they convene the 9 largest public agencies in Dallas County. And their entire strategy is to get those agencies to think about their work through the lens of reducing childhood poverty by 50% within a generation. So when you think about trying to change the mindset of corporations, not just out of goodwill and because it's, or altruism, it's really tying it to their survival, like their ability to thrive, their economic need. And I think sometimes we get caught up in the feel goods, right? And ultimately it's going to come down to the bottom line for them. And you have to be somebody that has a solution for them. Otherwise it is, like I said, it's, regimes change, feelings change, George Floyd fades away. Those things lead you right back to where you were in the first place. So really finding authentic partners and people who want to solve a problem are key.
Thank you very much. I could ask this group of practitioners questions all day. It's really insightful and really interesting. But rather than do that, I'm going to take a chance and say, is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask any questions? We've got a couple minutes left. Happy to open it up to anybody. I'm just going to put the caveat on here that at a lot of panels, people get up to ask questions and they don't ask questions, they make statements. I think most people are here to listen to these three. So if you're making a statement, I will cut you off. I'll try to do it nicely, but I will. So is there anyone who would like to, with that warning, want to ask anything? Othello, Emily, or Meaghan?
It's a question, though.
Please. And if you don't mind saying, introducing yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Bridget Pfeiffer. I'm the CEO of Living Better Life in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. So when you're working with funding or trying to bridge the gap of funding for your minority or underserved communities or in rural areas, what or who are some of those partners that you would say need to be at the table before you would want to come into that community and help, or to put together a program to be able to bridge some of those needs, to provide the wraparound support, to provide those other parts that's needed? What are some of the minimum and who are the minimum people that you would say would need to be in that ecosystem?
Stemming from the pilot, maybe. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. Again, I'll mention kind of Randolph's organization, Men and Women United, Step Up Wilmington. There are communities and schools. There were organizations that we knew were interacting with the pipeline that we felt like this kind of grant pilot, and then eventually, we're still driving towards hopefully a launch of Pay It Forward, Career Impact Bonds, some mix of student-centered financing to help fill the gap. So the first place we went were to those organizations that are doing that work and understand the barriers. So for us, what we needed to do was really kind of try to quantify what the financial gap is, whether it's transportation, childcare, mortgage, all of the above. And folks that are in organizations that are trusted in those spaces in the communities is where we had to go to be able to even begin to model this pilot, even though it was grant funded, right? Because we wanted to make sure that what someone was asking for in terms of an investment was going to pay off based on that credential, degree, and ultimate career. And then we went, in our case, to Cape Fear Community College and looked at the programs that were shorter term, high impact in terms of both graduation rates and then job placement rates. Two in particular, the electrical line worker training program, and I worked at Duke Energy, so I was very familiar with that program. It was only 10 weeks, and again, really short term and really high demand once someone graduates from that program. The other was the LPN to RN program, which was only 9 months, and there was only 12 seats in that program. So it was almost critical. What can we do to make sure all 12 graduate? Because at the time, I want to say Novant was hiring, a good 200 RNs, but we couldn't do it without that nonprofit partner on the ground in the case management, because life happens, right? Medical emergencies, childcare. And so you really need to, I would say, start with those partners that know those issues, know those barriers, and then you can quantify it and kind of try to financially model it on the back end, which is why we're talking to social finance.
And from where we sit, we need to have partners like Meaghan's organization or the team that the state of New Jersey has put together, somebody who's on the ground who knows the local partners and who understands the environment, understands the workforce ecosystem, the labor market, and all of the service providers that are needed to manage cases and help place people into jobs. So for us, it's partners like this that make this work. We need the idea of being, for us, we're helping launch a sustainable workforce financing product, but we're helping launch it. And we hope that over time, that local partners adopt and pick up this work and sustain it. There's always going to be a population that's not being served, and we would hope to continue to address each new population as they develop, so that in order to do that, we really need local, committed, grassroots, on the ground partners.
If I can just add, I know we're basically at time, but from a policy perspective, I couldn't agree with anything you say more. From a policy perspective, one partner that we brought to the table that I think that at least I hadn't thought about initially was our Department of Banking and Insurance and our Department of Consumer Protections. Because of the nature of this type of financing, we want to make sure that students are protected, that we're not replicating the same predatory practices that have been inflicted on communities, particularly communities of color, for generations. And so making sure that consumer protection is really part of the equation and part of the policy goal is really critical.
Othello, Emily, Meaghan, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thanks for having us.
Amazing what's going on in North Carolina. And I'm the CEO of Local Government Federal Credit Union and Civic Federal Credit Union, and that both organizations serve local government. So we say that our privilege is to serve the people that serve North Carolina. Our board and our management team believes it's very important to support the North Carolina Institute of Emerging Issues because we have such a unique thing that it's extraordinary in North Carolina is we have a regional advantage. And the regional advantage is also an intellectual advantage of everyone in this room. And so our board supports this because we want to address the big issues. Today's topic, we're probably going to be doubling our staff. And it's not just being able to hire the workforce, it's a highly diverse workforce that can innovate and create something that doesn't exist anywhere else. So North Carolina sets the example for the nation of not only governance and education, but we're also the fastest growing state in the next 20 years, one of the top 3. And so how can we change the state and improve it for the better? Workforce. So we have to have a diverse workforce that comes in. That's why today is so important. So I challenge you to support this initiative in any way you possibly can, because the benefits that we receive from our donation is much higher than what we give. With that, we got probably about a 15-minute break now. It's a networking break. Try to talk to someone you have not talked to yet. Again, the intellectual collective intelligence in this room is incredible. So enjoy your break, and please, we'll start back at 2:40.